My cousin sneered, "You'll never get what you want." So I waited until she was desperate for money, then bought the estate she wanted out from under her. It was one of those crisp Saturday mornings, where the sky was that perfect shade of blue, and the air was sharp enough to make you glad you remembered your scarf. I had just poured myself a third cup of coffee, the kind that's strong enough to stand a spoon in, and settled down with a creaky box of family photos that had somehow ended up in my possession after Aunt Loretta passed. Nobody else in the family wanted them, no surprise there. And since I was the sentimental one, as my cousin Daphne liked to remind me, they just got shoved my way. So there I was, sifting through the grainy black and white snapshots and a few blurry Polaroids from when we were kids, each picture throwing me back to another time, another place. And in the middle of the stack was Daphne. I couldn't help but linger over a photo of us as teenagers, me, the shy one in glasses and braces, and Daphne, blonde, perfect, and bossy even back then. She always found a way to get under my skin, to remind me, even subtly, that she was always a step ahead. Always winning. Always the one with the charm, the looks, the audacity to say what she wanted. That's when I remembered her words at Aunt Loretta's funeral last summer. The way she'd leaned in, her voice low but her tone razor sharp. "You'll never get what you want, Audrey," she'd said, that smirk plastered on her face like she was just stating the obvious. "People like you? You're too soft." It was an insult dressed as a casual comment, and it had gotten under my skin in a way nothing else had in years. I couldn't shake it, couldn't forget the sneer in her voice or the way she had glanced around, making sure we were just out of earshot from the rest of the family before she spat it out. I didn't respond then. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd struck a nerve. But something in me shifted that day. I was tired of playing the nice one, the pushover, the one who doesn't mind or can take a joke. It's funny how a few words can flip a switch, but they did. And that switch just happened to flick on around the same time I heard the first rumblings about Granddad's old estate. Granddad's house was a sprawling, somewhat dilapidated Georgian mansion on the edge of town, the kind of house that families used to grow up in, but now sat vacant, as if it were just waiting for someone with enough love, or money, to bring it back to life. Since Granddad passed, the estate had fallen into neglect. Nobody in the family had been willing or able to take on the project, most of us moved away, and those who stayed around didn't have the funds or the motivation to fix up the old place. But I couldn't shake the thought that maybe it was meant to be mine. Maybe I could make a life out there, fix up the house, make it something again. I could already hear Daphne laughing, though. She'd probably say I wasn't capable of managing a place like that, let alone making it my own. The thought made me seethe. And as if fate had it out for me, the very next week, I ran into her. It was at Tim's Diner, a little place we used to go as kids when our parents took us out for breakfast after church. I was sitting there, lost in thought, my mug half empty, when I heard her voice. Well, if it isn't Audrey. "Fancy seeing you here," she said, her voice honeyed with that sugary tone she used when she was about to tear someone down. I looked up, caught completely off guard. She stood there in all her Daphne-ness, blonde, stylish in her expensive boots and tailored coat, her nails immaculate, her posture perfect. Even her smirk was calculated. "I thought you were living the big city life now. What are you doing back in town?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from me without waiting for an invitation. "Oh, small towns are hard to quit," I said, keeping my tone casual and taking a sip of my coffee, refusing to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd surprised me. She laughed, that light little laugh that somehow managed to sound dismissive. "Right. So, you just here for a visit, or?" She raised an eyebrow, giving me the kind of once-over that made it clear she'd already judged me and found me lacking. "Thinking about sticking around for a bit. Actually," I added, feeling a strange thrill in throwing it out there, "I've been thinking about the estate." Daphne's eyes narrowed, and she leaned in, her voice low. "Granddad's estate? You mean that old mess of a house? That'd be the one." She let out a little snort, like she couldn't believe her ears. "Audrey, you do realize that place is practically falling apart, right? It's going to take serious money and, I mean, not to be rude, but... You? Really?" I felt my cheeks flush, but I held my ground. "What's that supposed to mean?" She gave me a pitying smile, one I'd seen too many times before. "Oh, honey, it's just... Well, it's just a bit beyond you, isn't it? It's not like fixing up your little apartment in the city. That place is a wreck." "I think I can handle it," I replied, keeping my voice as steady as I could, even though I could feel my anger bubbling under the surface. Daphne tilted her head, her eyes glinting. Sometimes we have to face facts, Audrey. Some things just aren't meant for us." I clenched my teeth, reminding myself to breathe, to keep calm. "Funny, I thought the same thing about you and the cheer squad back in high school." Her smile froze for just a second, and I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "That was a long time ago," she said, her voice a little too tight. "Exactly," I replied, meeting her gaze, refusing to back down. She shrugged, flipping her hair back like it was no big deal. "Well, If you really want to throw your money down a sinkhole, be my guest. But don't say I didn't warn you. And with that, she slid out of the booth and sauntered off, leaving me fuming in her wake. I watched her go, that familiar smirk on her face, and I swore to myself then and there that I'd make that estate mine. Not just because I wanted it, but because I knew she thought I couldn't do it. I'd prove her wrong if it was the last thing I did. The next few months were a whirlwind. I contacted a real estate agent, Mark Weston, who'd been a family friend for years. He knew everyone in town, and more importantly, he knew how to get things done quietly. "Are you serious about this, Audrey?" he asked one day over coffee. "That place isn't just some fixer-upper. It's a money pit." "I'm serious," I replied, my voice steady. "I know it's a mess, but I think it's worth it." He eyed me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But if you're serious, you'll need to act fast. Someone else has been sniffing around. I don't know who, but they're not wasting any time." I didn't need to ask who that someone was. Over the next few weeks, I got everything in order, staying quiet, not telling a soul, especially not Daphne. I could just imagine her trying to sabotage me somehow, swooping in at the last second to snatch it out from under me. And so I played my cards close, signing papers, filling out forms, jumping through every hoop marked through my way. Then, one evening in early November, I got a call. It was Daphne. "Hey, Audrey. Got a minute?" she asked, her voice unusually subdued. Sure," I said, thrown off guard by the tone in her voice. She hesitated, then sighed. "Listen, I'm in a bit of a bind. Financially." I blinked, taken aback. "Daphne? Asking for help?" This was new. "Oh?" I tried to sound casual, even as I felt a strange sense of satisfaction bubbling up inside me. She hesitated again, and I could almost see her wrestling with her pride. "I was wondering if you had any contacts who might be able to help me out with a loan." I had to bite back a laugh. "Funny you should ask. I do know someone who's looking to make an investment." The silence on the other end was thick, and I could feel her shock through the phone. "You wouldn't," she whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "Oh, I would," I replied, the satisfaction in my voice unmistakable. And so, a week later, I found myself standing on the front porch of Granddad's estate, the official deed in my hands, and Daphne standing beside me, practically vibrating with rage as she signed over the papers. I didn't say anything, just watched as she scribbled her name, her jaw clenched, her hands shaking. When she finally finished, she looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes burning. "You'll regret this, Audrey," she spat, her voice barely more than a whisper. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. "Maybe. But at least I'm not afraid to try." She stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing there, alone, in front of the house that was finally, truly mine. Standing on that old, creaky porch, I took a deep breath. The air felt different. Lighter, somehow. I looked at the house, the peeling paint, the cracked windows, the worn shutters, and felt a strange combination of nostalgia and excitement. This was mine now. And, as much as it was a project and a place full of family memories, it was also a win, my first real victory against Daphne. The kind of win you can savor, let roll around on your tongue, and enjoy. I knew she would stew over this, probably for the rest of her life. As I began the renovations, pouring every spare hour and dollar I had into restoring Granddad's estate, Daphne's resentment grew. I saw her around town now and then. Our hometown was too small to avoid each other forever. She'd shoot me glares from across the grocery store or sneer when she saw me with a clipboard full of swatches and samples at the local hardware store. Once, she even approached me while I was looking at paint. "That's interesting," she remarked, eyeing the soft green color I was considering for the dining room walls. "Kind of a safe choice, isn't it?" Her lips curled in that trademark Daphne smirk. "Thanks for the input, Daphne," I replied, smiling sweetly. "But I think I know what I'm doing." I watched her face, satisfied as her smirk faltered. She didn't know how to handle me now. I wasn't the same Audrey who'd been too meek to stand up to her in high school. And every time I saw her look at that house, I knew it burned her up inside that it was mine, not hers. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Daphne's finances had taken a turn for the worse. Apparently, she'd invested everything in that pop-up boutique, the one that had tanked spectacularly. I felt a pang of sympathy. Daphne may have been infuriating, but she was still family. Yet, I couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from knowing the tables had turned. But then, one chilly morning in February, she showed up on my doorstep. "Audrey," she said, a forced smile plastered on her face, her arms crossed tightly against the cold. She was dressed well, as usual, but there was something different about her, a faint desperation in her eyes. "Can I come in?" I hesitated. She hadn't set foot in this house since I'd taken it over, and I knew she'd probably rather do anything else. But curiosity got the better of me. "Sure," I said, stepping aside to let her in. She walked in slowly, her eyes darting around, taking in every detail of the freshly painted walls, the refinished floors, the antique chandelier I'd managed to restore. It was clear that she hadn't expected me to actually make something of the place. "Wow," she murmured, her tone reluctant, almost resentful. "You really did something with this place." "Thanks," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I watched her look around, her fingers grazing the edge of the dining room table, her eyes lingering on the details I'd so carefully chosen. I could tell she was struggling with the compliment. "So," I said finally, breaking the silence, "what brings you here?" She took a deep breath, letting it out in a slow, controlled exhale. "Look, Audrey. I know we haven't exactly been close." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "That's an understatement." She forced a laugh. "Right. Anyway, I've had a rough year. The boutique. It didn't go as planned." "I heard," I said simply, not bothering to hide the fact that her misfortune hadn't exactly been a secret. Daphne's eyes flickered with a flash of irritation, but she pressed on. "I'm in a bit of a bind, financially. I have some debts to settle, and, well, I was wondering if you'd consider selling the estate back to me." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The audacity. "Sell it back to you? Daphne, I've put everything I have into this place. Why on earth would I do that?" She cleared her throat, trying to recover. "I'd pay a fair price, of course. And, you know, this house has always been a part of my life, too. I've always thought of it as, well, mine." I stared at her, incredulous. "Yours? Daphne, you've never lifted a finger for this place. When Granddad died, you didn't even offer to help clean it out. You didn't care about it until I started making something of it." She stiffened, the corners of her mouth turning down. "That's not true," she said defensively. "I've always cared about this place. I just couldn't get to it." I shrugged. "It's too late for that now. I own it. It's mine. And I'm not interested in selling." Daphne's jaw clenched, her desperation barely masked by her pride. "Fine. But if you'd just consider a small loan, then. I just need something to help me get back on my feet." "A loan?" I echoed, my mind racing. I knew Daphne's history with money. Any loan I gave her would probably vanish faster than she could thank me for it. But then an idea hit me. A wicked, satisfying idea that, if it worked, would be the final nail in the coffin of our long rivalry. I forced a smile, keeping my voice calm. "All right, Daphne. I'll consider a loan. But I'll need some collateral." "Collateral?" she repeated, looking puzzled. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'll need something valuable to back up the loan. Something like your car." Daphne's pride and joy was her sleek new luxury car, a symbol of her success, or, more accurately, the success she was desperately clinging to. Her face fell. "My car?" she asked, incredulous. "Take it or leave it," I replied, feigning indifference. For a long moment, she stood there, clearly torn. Her pride warred with her desperation. Finally, with a resigned sigh, she nodded. "Fine. But this is temporary." "Of course," I said, hiding my smirk as I led her to the paperwork. The final twist. As I watched Daphne drive away that afternoon in a borrowed car, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. But that feeling quickly vanished as I thought about all the years she'd spent putting me down, making me feel small, reminding me that I'd never get what I want. Well, now I had what I wanted, and she was finally the one who'd lost. True to form, Daphne didn't keep up with the loan payments. She stalled, ducked my calls, and eventually stopped answering altogether. Months passed, and I followed through with my conditions. When she defaulted, I claimed her car, legally and cleanly. One sunny afternoon, I had it towed to the front of Granddad's estate, parked it out front, and hung a for sale sign on it. That beautiful luxury car gleamed in the sun, a testament to Daphne's pride, and her downfall. Not long after, Daphne stopped by, her face pale, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do this, Audrey." "Didn't I?" I asked, crossing my arms, leaning against the doorframe with a feeling of satisfaction I hadn't known was possible. "All those years, Daphne, you've pushed me, dismissed me, sneered at me, and thought I'd just stand there and take it. Well, not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she seemed to crumble. I'm sorry, Audrey. I didn't know you felt this way." "Maybe you didn't care enough to notice," I replied softly, but not unkindly. "Now, if you don't mind, I have some things to tend to." I closed the door, watching through the window as Daphne walked away, her shoulders slumped, her head down. It wasn't exactly victory, but it was closure. I had finally taken a stand, claimed something for myself, and in the process, I had found a new kind of strength. As I watched her car sit in the driveway, glinting in the sunlight, I knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter for me. The house, the estate, my life, I had finally reclaimed it all. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace.